Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning to you all. We start with the lectures again on technical barriers to trade. So consequently, at the end of 2021, committee members agreed to hold in 2022 and 2023 experience sharing discussions on the relation of technical barriers to trade with the following digital topics. As we have already discussed that technical barriers to trade cover wide range of subjects where they try to regulate the trade, also based on national security, also based on personal rights of the individual. So in the light of that, they have taken also the trade of digital work and any such digital technology, the transfer of technology from developed countries to developing countries. So the committee has suggested some of the trade issues like use of digital solutions for conformity assessment of goods obtained through e-commerce, possible impacts of technical barriers on trade in intangible digital products including artificial intelligence, and regulatory approaches on cyber security. So how the member states they can collectively formulate any guidelines with regard to the digital use of the digital technology, the new method devised for e-commerce and e-trade, and then the wide range of issues that are related to cyber security. Since digitalization is also a powerful tool for enhancing transparency, that is like we use the digital technology to not simply that is like to facilitate our work done, but also for the storage of data, for the storage of information, but then and that is like to maintain the factual knowledge about any such person or any such let's say goods that are transported from one place to another, but then it can be misused also. So data is that is collected or data that is saved in the digital form, that is for keeping the records and also to maintain long-term transparency goals, but then there are also the chances of its misutilization. Transparency of regulatory measures covered by technical barriers to trade agreement. The WTO Secretariat has developed ePing, publicly available digital platform that provides alert services for regulations covering particular products and markets. It also offers a digital forum where stakeholders can share information on the measures undertaken at national and international level. So there are efforts being made where the collectively the interested parties they can give suggestions, they can also suggest what new changes can be made in this concern and how further the security can be enhanced when it comes to the use of technology in the trade services. The technical barriers to trade agreement was not, however, the first one to discipline technical barriers. So it's a like evolved concept on regulations being imposed for the trade purposes. Earlier also there during the GATT time some measures were suggested for putting restrictions based on technical requirements, and what we see in the WTO is far improved and far evolved version of the technical requirements that are used for the trade purposes, and that covers almost wide range of goods and services. The technical barriers to trade agreement was not, however, the first one to discipline technical barriers standards, mainly to maintain the standards and regulations to international trade in goods. In fact, the technical barriers to trade agreement was built upon the provisions of the previous GATT agreement that had been in operation for 15 years by the time the WTO was created in 1995. So the previous trade regulatory system, that was GATT, also had certain provisions for maintaining transparency, maintaining safety and safeguard measures in the technical sense, and that also when it comes to the cross-border trade of goods. The 1979 Tokyo Round Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, commonly known as Standards Code, as a plurilateral agreement. However, the Standard Code was made up from only a subset of all GATT contracting parties. So, like there was within the GATT system, it was not that all the contracting parties of the GATT they were party to this standard code or any such technical regulatory code, but there were some group of states or the contracting parties that were members to or let's say they were signatory to that code. Now there is a some kind of interpretational difference which I would like to highlight here. One is the term used, plurilateral agreement. So what is plurilateral agreement? It is when there is a multilateral agreement, that means all the member states that are party to it, we can say that it is a multilateral agreement. Now within, let's say there are 100 member states party to any such agreement, and within that 100 members, it could be there are 50 of them or 60 of them party to any particular specific agreement which is within the ambit of that multilateral agreement. So one is the mainframe multilateral agreement. Now within that mainframe multilateral agreement, there is another small or subgroup of member states that are party to another agreement which fall within the domain of that multilateral agreement system. So that is the term, there we use the term plurilateral agreement. So the standard code that was not at that time uniformly applicable to all the contracting parties, but it was applicable to certain contracting parties of the GATT system, and that is why the term used is here plurilateral agreement. One more thing that need to be highlighted here, there is a difference between terminology. When we say the parties to the WTO, we use the term member states. When we use that and when we talk about parties to the GATT, then we use the term contracting parties. It is so that the GATT was not an institution in itself, but it was simply a contractual document. That is why it is termed a general agreement on tariffs and trade. So that was kind of an agreement between the parties. So the term used is contracting parties to that agreement. And whereas WTO is an institution itself, so all the member states that are party to the WTO system, the term used is member states. So that means those who are the member states of this institution, they are that common term is member states. As a plurilateral agreement, however, the standard code was made up of only a subset, 46 of all the contracting parties. So among the large group of contracting parties that GATT had, there was some group of states, that is 46 in numbers, who were party to the plurilateral agreement that was in relation to the technical barriers to trade, or formerly known as standards code. The technical barriers to trade agreement is a WTO multilateral trade agreement. This means that unlike the 1979 standards code, the technical barriers to trade agreement is binding on all. So there is a big shift from the GATT system, because the GATT usually had the choice where many such agreements that was only applicable or only had the binding effect on some of the contracting parties, and those contracting parties were given the choice. But in the WTO system, most of the agreements, they are equally applicable, uniformly applicable to all the member states, except for the categorization of developed, developing and less developed countries. Secondly, there are certain plurilateral agreements that were existing prior to the formation of the WTO, that have been recognized in the WTO system, but otherwise whatever are the listed agreements in various annexures of the WTO, they are mandatorily applicable to all the member states of the WTO. So it's not the choice or voluntary choice of the member state that they are willing to be the member state of, or they are willing to be the party to this agreement, or they are not willing to be the party to this agreement. So that can't be in this case. For example, let's say in the agreements on goods, there are agreement related to subsidies and countervailing measures. Then there is an agreement related to agriculture subsidies or agriculture agreement, then the agreement that is to put check on the dumping practices. So a member state of the WTO cannot give the choice that it is willing to be party to the subsidies agreement and it is not willing to be the party to the agreement to put check on the dumping practices. So it has to be party to all the, or let's say it has to abide by the rules and regulations of all the agreements that are listed in the next year. The technical barriers to trade agreement is a WTO multilateral trade agreement. This means that unlike the 1979 standards code, the technical barriers to trade agreement is a binding on all, not just some the WTO members. All the WTO multilateral trade agreements, including the technical barriers to trade agreement, are part of a coherent single undertaking administered under the umbrella of the WTO. That is, like the WTO is an overarching institutional setup with listed agreements, and the member state of the WTO, they are bound to accept all these agreements. This is why technical barriers to trade agreement and all the other multilateral agreements share the same fundamental principle, including non-discrimination, promoting predictability of access to markets and technical assistance, and special and differential treatment for developing members. Now, what is the, let's say, advantage of being this party to all the agreement? That is the common set of principles that are applicable in all the agreements, and therefore all the parties or all the member states, they can in a very consistent manner, they can apply those principles in relation to all the agreements. Like if they are applying non-discrimination practices concerning subsidies or any such anti-dumping practices, likewise they will be applying non-discrimination practices with regard to the technical barriers to trade, with regard to sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And for the WTO also, it is convenient that they can apply the same principles to all the member states, rather than being selective that this group of member states, they are not following or they are not ready to accept this principle, the other group is ready to follow this principle but not the other principle. So all the mainframe principles that are, or the functional principles of the WTO, they are equally applicable to all the parties or all the member states. Otherwise it would have been like to give them choices, and then the choices would have made things more complex. So that is the reason why technical barriers to trade agreement and all the other multilateral agreements, they follow this principle of non-discrimination, promoting predictability of access to market. Non-discrimination here means the procedure that is adopted for checking the, let's say, or testing the technicalities when there is an imported good cannot be different than that is used for testing or checking the domestically produced good, or for the goods produced in country A, the process or the method that is used for testing or checking a product that is produced in country A, that is should be the same with that of the product that is produced and brought in the market from the country B. So if there are two exporters, country A and country B, and they are exporting goods to country C, so C cannot adopt different methods for testing their production process, packaging process, when in the case of country A there is a different process adopted, or in case of country B, the products for country B, there is a different process adopted. So that can't be the case, because in that sense it will be discriminatory, the application of the rules will be discriminatory in nature. So that is not let's say permissible under the WTO system. The technical barriers to trade agreement is part of a broad category of WTO agreements dealing with non-tariff measures. Now, what is the key feature of technical barriers to trade? Basically, they are non-tariff barrier or non-tariff measures. Now, what is the difference between tariff measures and non-tariff measure? Because the tariff measure are something where we impose higher custom duties or higher tax rate, so as to put restrictions on the trade of that product, or so as to put check on the quantity that is imported of that particular product. But here it is mainly based on the quality. So you can easily differentiate it in terms of putting restrictions based on quantitative methods and putting restrictions based on qualitative methods. So the technical barriers to trade or such arrangements through technical barriers to trade are more in the sense of qualitative checking or qualitative restrictions on the trade practices. The technical barriers to trade agreement is part of broad category of WTO agreement dealing with non-tariff measures. The term non-tariff measures encompasses all measures that affect actually or potentially trade other than tariffs. Non-tariff measures which include technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures. Now, all this, like here it is stated, standards, conformity assessment, they are in relation to the quality. So like whether they meet the quality standards, whether they meet the environmental standards, safety measures, and then conformity assessment procedures. So what is the method to test whether they conform to these standards or conform to these principles or not, because they are then subject to it. It's not simply by stating that they meet the required standards, but it's the importing state, it is possible for that importing country to apply the testing measures for finding out whether the listed standards, whether the listed standards have been complied by that producer or not. The three type of measure covered by technical barriers to trade present the international trading system with several challenges. On the one hand, governments frequently rely on non-tariff measure to achieve public policy goals. Example, basically it is the idea is here to protect human health and environment. It's not simply confined to the human health, but when it the use of the term environment itself encompasses also the health conditions and the living conditions of animals, plants, and all such related lives that can affect the entire ecosystem. So on the one hand, government frequently relies on non-tariff measure to achieve public policy goals like protecting human health or the environment. The fact that trade is affected is a normal and legitimate consequence of such regulatory process. Now comparing this situation with that of the free trade principle, that is how the trade liberalization policies can be adopted, or how the market system can be made more flexible with regard to the international goods of like nature or of different nature also. On the one hand, those kind of rules are, let's say, prescribed, but then there are certain limitations to those rules, because we cannot accept, or the member states, they realize that they cannot accept the flexibility to the extent of degrading the quality. So, and that degradation in the quality at the end of the day will affect the plant life, let's say the human life, or the entire ecosystem. So there has to be certain like checking points, or let's say the points where the testing can be done, whether the right kind of goods are sent in the market or not. So therefore, in the light of that, these tariff measures and non-tariff measures are stated, and non-tariff measures are mainly listed, or they are enabled mainly to check the quality part, and that also the quality in relation to the risk factors, that is, if those qualities are not met, that what kind of risk can be there. So the mainly here the risks are all related to the health of the person and also the national security. Here in case of technical barriers to trade, it's also the question of national security that comes into the picture, and that enables the state to put various kind of restrictions to meet the national security goals. On the other hand, a non-tariff measure can sometimes be unnecessarily trade restrictive or unjustifiably discriminatory. Now it's from the legal scope of this provisions covered under the technical barriers to trade. With this level of scope, it's very clear that they will have an overlapping effect, and not simply overlapping effect, but they may even try to, depending upon the interpretation being done and depending upon their execution, they will try to encroach upon the freedom, the scope of the freedom that is given under the different set of provisions meant to implement the free trade goals. So there definitely is a, let's say, some slippery slope, I would like to say here, in the legal sense, because the interpretation here very much creates the difference, because based on one interpretation it can be that the restrictions that are imposed, they are meant for maintaining the health conditions, maintaining the security concerns, but on the other hand the freedom that are pushed, that is for the promotion of the trade, and connecting that promotion of the trade with the WTO mainframe goals of free trade, can have some kind of a tension zone between these two. But then it's for the dispute settlement body or the other mechanisms that are working for resolving such crisis, they have to take active decision on this concern. But that is again, it's a functionally, if we say, or in terms of operational system as the WTO has been created, the consultation process has been emphasized very much. So in the situations where there seems to be confusion whether the listed regulations are meant to maintain or to check certain technicalities or to check the security concerns, whether that is the right methods adopted to put those restrictions, and then whether to what extent they should have been imposed, or whether they are putting unnecessary restrictions on the freedom that is provided under this agreement for freedom to trade and freedom to provide services. So that can be done through the consultations also. This agreement is an important tool to improve coherence and mutual supportiveness between open trade on the one hand and the domestic policies that country use to achieve public policy objectives on the other. So like just I have stated, the same is listed here also, that how this agreement, mainly this technical barriers to trade agreement, can be functional, or how that can be very useful. So that can be useful if there is some coherence between the parties, or there is some clear understanding between the parties to know the reason for applying those restrictions or to applying those rules. So this agreement is an important tool to improve coherence and mutual supportiveness. So that depends upon the mutual understanding and mutual supportiveness of the member states, concerned member states. Mutual supportiveness between open trade on the one hand and the domestic policies that countries use to achieve public policy objectives on the other. So domestic policies and the public policy objectives are mainly this national security or the health concern, and open trade here is the free trade goals that we have already discussed. In short, the disciplines of the technical barriers to trade agreement are intended to help government achieve a balance between upholding legitimate regulatory policy objectives, example the protection of human and animal life and health and other protection of the environment, and respecting key disciplines in the agreement, that is non-discrimination, avoidance of unnecessary barriers to trade, and use of international standards as a basis of technical regulations where possible. So it's very well stated that governments or the states that are importing the goods from another country, they can, by application of technical barriers, they can achieve the balance, or let's say they can maintain the balance between the two different set of objectives. One, the objectives that are the free trade objectives, and then the second, the domestic objectives, that is how they can protect the life of the people, the health concern about their population, and also the flora and fauna. And moreover, when applying these regulatory measures, they need to be cautious that it's not applied some discriminatory intent, or they do not create some unnecessary barriers. Now, how this unnecessary barriers and the discriminatory intent can be figured out? Mainly the unnecessary barriers, that means there has to be some evidence before this technical barriers to trade are applied, whether they are in true sense risky for that state, or they bear some risk also for the population or the human life where these products are imported. The technical barriers to trade agreement contain various criteria relevant for defining its scope. One set of criteria concerns that what subject matter is excluded from the agreement. So that is like we need to set the criteria how to apply it, or what kind of things can be excluded, or that may not be very serious issue with regard to the health or the security concern. The agreement expressly states that it does not apply to measure on services for the government procurement purposes and covered by sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. So once as we know that sanitary and phytosanitary measure are also having those objectives to maintain the health concern and the safety, health and safety concern of the human plants and the other living creatures. So since that is already covered under this agreement, so why again to go these tests through the technical barriers to trade, if they are included also in the technical barriers to trade, and there is no provision in the technical barriers to trade agreement excluding what is already covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure, then any member state, they can apply this twice. These tests can be applied twice, which will be that in that sense that will be like putting restrictions on the free trade. So being cautious that the provisions do not have the overlapping effect, or the provisions in the two different set of agreements, similar provisions in two different set of agreements, they do not create unnecessary hindrance to the free trade. That is why there is clear exclusion whatever is covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. And then if they are meant for government procurement purposes, like when the government it's a party to purchase those goods, so in that case, or it does not apply to the measure on services, where services here mainly means where the human beings, they act as human resources, and they are as a factor they are contributor to the economy, or they make great let's say economic support to the economy through their skills. Now here it's not that any individual can be considered as a service provider, but when we talk about the service provider in the global sense or in terms of international trade, then that person must be highly skilled, who has a demand across his border. All right. So those categories of people or those class of persons, for them the technical barriers to trade exemptions are there. Actually the technical barriers to trade won't be very purposeful also if they are applied to the human beings as the human resource person, and therefore as a contributor to or as a factor to one of the economic contributors. The technical barriers to trade agreement in principle covers a broad category of non-tariff measures affecting international trade. The agreement covers domestic measures regulating products either in terms of their characteristics, what they must or must not be made of, their packaging or labeling, etc. Now one thing is that when we talk about these technical barriers, it's still hard to say whether there can be uniform rules or not, like what can be the barriers imposed by India, whether the same kind of barriers can be imposed by United States or they differ. Now here partly these standards are set, but partly they are depending upon the domestic requirements. Whatever are the requirements, the standard requirement in country like India may not be the standard requirements of United States. So in that respect, the flexibilities, or let's say the choice based flexibilities, has to be included in the provisional setup. So these choices are there inherently in the agreement itself, giving member states the choices to maintain the standards. But then in certain sectors there is a uniform set of standards also that are applicable to all the member states uniformly, so that it varies, and there is both uniformity and variation in these set of standards. The technical barriers to trade agreement in principle covers a broad category of non-tariff measure affecting international trade. The agreement covers domestic measures, that is why it says that it covers the domestic measures regulating products either in terms of their characteristics, what they must or must not be made of, or their packaging or labeling, etc., or in terms of their processes and production methods. So it's not simply that the end product that matters, but what process has been used or how it has been packed how the packaging has been done, what are the production methods applicable for making this final product, how they are made or produced. So technical barriers to trade measures can pursue a wide variety of policy objectives such as health and safety as well as protection of the environment. Now, what is the basis of those regulation, or what is the basis of those testing? It's different than that of the commercial objective. Mainly it is the health concern, the safety concern, and the protection of environment. The agreement deals with first in terms of product coverage as expressed in Article 1.3. All products including, now first is to whom this agreement is applicable, what is the nature of the goods. Like sanitary and phytosanitary measures, they are applicable on animals, plants, or animal and plants product, or anything that is derived from animal and plant product. Now, concerning this technical barrier to trade agreement, that has a very wider scope than that of the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So, what is the range of the product, or what is the product coverage? In terms of product coverage as expressed in Article 1.3, all products including industrial, so it covers industrial product and agriculture products, are subject to the provisions of technical barriers to trade. This means that a measure cannot automatically fall outside the technical barriers to trade agreement scope just because it is a regulation about certain kinds of product, for example food or agriculture goods. So mainly you can say almost this technical barriers to trade can be applicable on all kinds of goods, whether they are industrial or agriculture, unless for some reasons they are excluded. So that is one thing. Now, what are the reasons for exclusion? Like if they are covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure, if those are the goods that are meant for the government procurement, or those are the goods, let's say, that are covered under the human the service provided by the human beings. So in that category, actually the service provided by human beings need to be defined as a goods in different legal terminologies. But for explaining this, that what can be excluded, we here use the term that the goods in the sense of the service provided by human beings. So that are the grounds for inclusion. But otherwise, broadly, if we say that almost all kinds of goods are covered here in terms of technical barriers to trade agreement. Now, examples are corn, sardines, oranges, coffee, poultry, and livestock. These are like the example that all these kind of, whether it's a vegetarian thing, corn, sardines, that is the fish, marine life, oranges, fruits, coffee, poultry, coffee, that is the cash crop, poultry, or the livestock. Second, the same is true in terms of the objectives pursued. A measure cannot be automatically excluded from the technical barriers to trade agreement scope just because it addresses a particular type of policy objectives, at least when the objectives are described in broad terms, for example, as being the protection of human life or animal health. Instead, here too, the agreement scope is wide. It covers regulatory measures fulfilling a wide range of legitimate objectives. No objective is a priori carved out from the agreement except, as we shall see below, those that are explicitly covered by sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. So as stated to you earlier, that what is the ground for exclusion? The ground for exclusion mainly depends upon either they are purposefully carved out of this technical barriers to trade agreement, or if they are covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. The technical barriers to trade agreement is specific and exhaustive. It only covers 3 types of strictly defined measures. Now, what are the measures adopted to fulfill the criteria that these technical barriers to trade have been applied? That means if like the product has entered into the market, in a foreign market, and we need to test about its whether they fulfill the criteria as set under technical barriers to trade or not, then what we have to do? Then we have to take 3 measures, and out of these 3 measures, some of them are mandatorily to be followed, and some measures may not be mandatory. So if they fulfill the criteria as set by the mandatory measures, that means they fulfill the criteria of technical barriers, and then that goods can be used in that foreign market. And if they do not fulfill those criteria of mandatory measures, then they need to be excluded, or they cannot be allowed to be used in that foreign market. So that is how this agreement works, and it applies to both the agriculture products and the industrial products. So both has to fulfill the testing criteria of the quality marks. And those quality marks, how they are derived? In case of the industrial goods, they cover the final outcome, that is the final product. then the process that has been used for its production, and the ingredients that it contains. Now, technical barriers to trade is specific and exhaustive. It only covers three types of strict defined measures, the measures that are adopted. One is technical regulations, the technical regulations, whether that has been complied or not. The standard and CAP. What is CAP? It is conformity assessment procedure. That is, after the test, if the tests confirm that it is fit to be used in that market, to know if a particular product fulfills the requirement established by relevant technical regulations. The implication of, so we can say basically there are two measures. The third one is simply after testing whether they have fulfilled the criteria or not. The implication of having such precise definition is clear. If a measure does not meet any of them, it cannot be a technical barriers to test measure. Now, the three test measure is defined here. Why it is defined? That if the country says that it is going technical barriers test, that means it has to follow these three steps while making this test. If it does not follow these three steps, that means it is not testing under technical barriers to trade agreement. So that is one reason why it has been made very clear in terms of its definition, in terms of its measures that are mandatorily to be applied. Now, within these three measures, what are criteria that the good or product fulfills? It is for the testing authority to determine, and based on the results obtained by these testing authority, it will be decided whether that product can be allowed to enter the market or not. So here it is. First is technical regulations. Second is standards and CAP, that is conformity assessment procedure, to know if a particular product fulfills the requirement established by relevant technical regulations. And then the implication of having such precise definition is clear. If a measure does not meet any of them, it cannot be a technical barriers to test measure. And if this is the case, then such measure will always fall outside the scope of the agreement, regardless of its product coverage or objectives it pursues. Now comes, as I have stated earlier also, that there is some relationship between technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary measures. At times, it may seem that technical barriers to trade has an overlapping effect on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And in order to avoid the consequences of these overlapping effect, it's very clearly included in the exclusion, the grounds of exclusion from technical barriers to trade, that the kind of tests that are covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measures, or kind of products, if they are covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measures, they will be excluded from technical barriers to trade. So why it is such exclusion has been explicitly made, that is in order to avoid the overlapping effect. Now, in order to understand the overlapping effect, we need to understand if there exists some kind of legal connectivity or the relationship between these two set of laws, that is the laws based on technical barriers to trade and laws based on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So the relationship of technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary agreements in terms of objectives as they relate to specific products. Technical barriers to trade measure can cover any product, as stated to you earlier, that it's a wide, its scope is quite wide, and its range is wide, and it covers all kind of products and goods, whether they are industrial or agriculture. But whereas sanitary and phytosanitary measures are concerned, they are selective, so they are mainly confined to plants, animals, or the products and that are derived from plants and animals. But what about the industrial product? They are not covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. So it covers any product and wide variety of objectives, from car safety and energy saving devices to shape of food cartoons. To give some example pertaining to human health and safety, technical barriers to trade measures could include caps also. Further, caps to approve, that is like the assessment procedure, the cap is the assessment procedure. To approve the marketing and pharmaceutical products, the labeling of cigarettes, or even requirement for seat belts and children's seats in the car. So even the environment qualifications or environment related eligibilities, or the requirements that are meant, the extra caution that is supposed to be used for the products related to the children, for the toddlers, all that is covered under the technical barriers to trade. Or how the cigarette packaging should be labeled, that means there should be a clear indication that smoking is injurious to health. So how that can be decided, whether that covers the regulatory measure or not, the packaging covers the regulatory measure or not. That is, if it is not put that the smoking is injurious to health, that means it does not fulfill the technical barriers to trade criteria. But then we can see the safety measure also. To approve the marketing of pharmaceutical products, the labeling of cigarettes, or even requirements for seat belts and children's seats in cars. While some measures addressing human disease may fall under technical barriers to trade, for example, requiring warning labels in tanning equipment, addressing risk of developing skin cancer, all that is covered under technical barriers to trade. Now there is some overlapping. How there is, like in sanitary and phytosanitary measure, they will take the products that are derived from plants or that derived from animals. If the measure concern disease that are carried by plants or animals, such as rabies or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or are transmitted through food, they most probably will fail instead under the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. They most probably will fall under instead under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. For food, most labeling requirement, information on nutrition and quality and packaging regulations are generally not considered to be sanitary and phytosanitary measure, and hence are normally subject to technical barriers to trade. So like just stated here, that whether it's mentioned in the cigarette pack or not, or like in the alcohol bottles or not, the warning symbols that will be covered under technical barriers to trade. And then sometime how that alcohol is produced, whether that is produced out of let's say the discarded molasses, or it is produced out of the wheat, or produced out of the fresh, let's say fresh fruits, the wine, mainly the wine that is produced with the fresh fruits, all that will be covered under the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. However, regulations that, for example, addresses the microbiological contamination of food, set allowable levels of pesticide or veterinary drugs residues, or identify permitted food additives, all fall under the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. So there you can see the difference, like the fresh fruits or not, or what kind of fruits are used to prepare that product, that will fall under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. Some packaging and labeling requirements, if directly related to safety of the foods, are also subject to sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. So this is again the gray area you see, where it falls both under technical barriers to trade and under this sanitary and phytosanitary measure. Let's say, for example, if the packaging in some category, if the Tetra Pak is done in some category of foods, that may be not good. So that means it affects the quality of the food. So in that case, whether it falls under technical barriers to trade or sanitary and phytosanitary measure becomes the ambiguous issue. Now in some cases, if it is like affecting the health of the people, if the food is packed under Tetra containers, or under the, if it is Tetra packed and it is injurious to the health of the person, so it can easily fall under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. But let's say the type of packaging, or let's say the quality of the packaging, that is the concern area, then that falls under technical barriers to trade. Now there are certain examples to clarify further how we can understand what falls under sanitary and phytosanitary measure and what falls under technical barriers to trade. For example, fertilizer. Regulation on permitted fertilizer residue in food and animal feed, because that is related to the health of animals, therefore it covers under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. So regulation on permitted fertilizer residue in food and animal feed, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Specifications to ensure fertilizer works effectively. So how much or on what specifications that should be listed, that what it contains or what are the features of that fertilizers, and whether it's really effective, that again becomes technical barriers to trade. Then specifications to protect farmers from possible harm from handling fertilizer. That means what caution the farmers should apply when they are using these kind of fertilizers. So that again becomes whether that is listed or not, the right kind of caution is mentioned in the packaging or not. So that again covers under technical barriers to trade. Next is food labeling, regulation on permitted food safety, health warning, use, dosage. That means what kind of food it is, then what will be the effect on the health of this by consuming this food. Health warnings, like if it is overeaten or if it is over consumed, what can be its effect, use, dosage, all that is covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure. Now again, regulation on size, construction, structure, safety, handling, that how it should be packed, how it should be preserved, and then how it should the food can be, in what respect the food can be handled, that is covered under technical barriers to trade. Similarly, regard to the fruit, regulation on treatment of imported food to prevent pests spreading, that it does not get infected by the pests. So on what basis, what kind of treatments that should be done. Now the kind of treatments is important here, because that treatment should not at the end of the day affect the human beings. Like if the fruits are treated with those kind of pesticides, and as a matter of side effect after the food is consumed or that fruit is consumed by the human, that affects the health, so that then it will fall under sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. But then regulation on quality, grading and labeling of imported fruit, that means what is the quality of that fruit, or what is its gradation, and the type of labeling that is done on the imported food, that falls under technical barriers to trade agreement. Actually it can fall under both. If we see the regulation on quality under both sanitary and phytosanitary measure and the regulation, but more or less it's the larger part falls under technical barriers to trade. Then is bottled water that we purchase in the market, also termed as the mineral water. Bottled water specification for the bottles, materials that can be used, because what is safe for the human beings, or whether its consumption is safe for the human beings, that is covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure. Requirements like no residue of disinfectant, so water not contaminated, that is again under sanitary and phytosanitary measure. Now permitted sizes to ensure standard volumes, and then permitted sizes to allow stacking and displaying, and also the kind of packaging that it does not get infected by any outside external factors, like the packaging is done properly, that it is not getting infected by the bacteria, such kind of water, that is again under this technical barriers to trade. Then concerning cigarette packets, government health warning, smoking can be injurious damage to your health, that is like as I told you now, the printing on the packaging that smoking can injuriously damage your health. The label's objective is health, but it is not about the food, so it is not sanitary and phytosanitary measure, it is covered under technical barriers to trade. Other examples can be sanitary and phytosanitary measures typically deal with additives in food or drink. Technical barriers to trade measures typically deal with labeling of food, drinks and drugs. Sanitary and phytosanitary measure typically deal with contaminants in food or drinks. Technical barriers to trade measure typically deal with grading and quality requirement for food. Further again, sanitary measures they deal with poisonous substances in food or drink, whereas the technical barriers to trade deals with packaging requirements for the foods. Additionally, sanitary and phytosanitary measures typically deal with residues of veterinary drugs or pesticides. Residues, that means after use effect, or once they are like used in the farmlands, then again whatever is still remaining in the food, or that has been observed by the crops or the foods, what will be its effect. Residues of veterinary drugs or pesticides in food or drinks. Here packaging and labeling for dangerous chemicals and toxic substances. Next is sanitary and phytosanitary measure covers certification, that is on about food safety, animal or plant health. Here it is technical measures that are mainly concerning regulations for electrical appliances also. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures, they cover processing methods and with implications for food safety. Processing methods, that what process has been adopted for preparation of these foodstuff, or what ingredients has been used while the processing has been done. Like what process has been adopted to prepare mango pickle, what process has been adopted to use prepare these pack of chips. Here regulations, when it comes to technical barriers to trade, it covers regulation for cordless phones, radio equipment, etc. Next is like sanitary and phytosanitary measure covers labeling requirements directly related to food safety. Technical barriers to trade covers textiles, garment labeling. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures also includes declaring areas free from pests or disease, whereas technical barriers to trade covers regulations for ships and ship equipment. Now, just to highlight declaring areas free from pests or disease, that means like yesterday we discussed the case where India has imposed restriction on the food that was imported from United States, mainly the meat of the bird, with the contention that it is infected by this avian influenza. Now the point is whether avian influenza is prevalent only in some particular region of that country, exporting country, or it has affected the entire country, or only it's affected in small part of that country, and other parts where it is very negligibly affecting that country. So from where we are getting the food stuff, whether we can draw the distinction of that food stuff within that infected country or not. So that can be done under the sanitary and phytosanitary measures by making clear indication that this food product or this food stuff that is exported is not from that particular region where the infection does exist. So it says like declaring areas free from pest or disease. Next is preventing disease or pests spreading to a country. That is covered under sanitary and phytosanitary measure, and safety regulations for toys that are covered under technical barriers to trade. Safety regulations for toys means whether there are some kind of chemicals that are applied or any such substances that are used which may be harmful for the children, or that may create some infections to the children. Other sanitary requirements for imports, example imported pellets used to transport animals. Here we have only this list of example to create the distinction that how the technical barriers to trade are applied and in what concern sanitary and phytosanitary measures are applied. Beyond coverage in terms of substantive obligations, the technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreements as mentioned above also share some common elements. These include, for example, the basic obligation not to discriminate, like earlier stated, that the principle of non-discrimination. Now that is actually the part of one of the mainframe principle, that is the national treatment principle or most favored nation clause principle. So there the non-discrimination principle is very important because that may create, that is to avoid discrimination between the domestically produced goods and the goods that are imported from outside, or that discrimination can be from the goods that are coming from country A and the goods that are imported from country B. So in case a nation has a favorable relationship with country A, therefore it is not following strictly these technical barriers to trade or sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement because of the favorable relation with that country, and it is applying sanitary and phytosanitary measures or technical barriers to trade when the goods are coming from country B because it does not has the favorable relationship with that country. So that is the meaning here when we say about the discriminatory approach about any nation. Also, they both require governments to notify proposed measure in advance. That means it is not that once the goods have reached to the shore or they are now at the warehouse at the port, then we start investigating whether they comply with these regulations or not, or they comply with these rules listed under the sanitary measures or sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and also the technical barriers to trade. Rather, that should be declared in advance that what are our standards, what are the required standards for the goods that are supposed to be used in our market. And sometimes, as stated earlier, that mainly in case of sanitary and phytosanitary measure, there can be an international standard accepted by that nation, or standard has to be substantiated with some evidences that why the standard above some international standard is to be applied. So the government has to notify this in advance. Both require governments to set up information in offices. That means there must be a proper bureau or a dealing hand with these information, that what is the level of standard that is required. However, only sanitary and phytosanitary agreements contains a list of the 3 relevant international bodies that should be considered for this purpose. Now, as earlier discussed, that they have these international bodies mainly suggesting the standards that are that can be applied by the member states, uh, putting, let's say, or giving reference to those international standards set by those international bodies. But mainly when it comes to technical barriers to trade, there are not such international reference points from where we can seek those standard for labeling or putting restrictions. So for now, I thank you for being part to this discussion, and soon we will continue more on discussions on technical barriers to trade. Thank you very much.
Understanding oneself, understanding others, understanding society at large, understanding the nature, these are all driven by basic human curiosity. We would all love to understand why things happen, what happens, what is the final outcome, why certain things fail. These are all exercises that we perform in various domains of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge in various domains, you would realize they are actually social artifacts. They have to be rooted into historical perspective, they have to be culturally salient, and there would be socio-political reasons behind this. Whether you talk with respect to engineering sciences, whether you talk with respect to physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, that is the reason why humanities and social sciences should be understood by all of us. The knowledge that is segregated, that is divided with respect to areas, specializations, all of them needs to be understood in its context. And what provides the context? It is the social reality. How do you correlate knowledge in a given domain with the cultural reality, with the social reality, with the socio-political compulsions? Okay, how do you understand the law of nature, okay, in its totality? And for doing that, you require the understanding of humanities and social sciences. Say for instance, if you are trying to understand the effect of a particular bacteria, a virus, any microbe, how it affects behavior, how it affects the organism, human being, you start looking at it from a pure biological point of view. If you are trying to look at a particular type of a wavelength, say for example, you are emphasizing on the understanding of the effect of radiation on human life, you are looking at things from a physical point of view. You are looking at the corresponding changes inside the body, you are looking at the physiological side of the understanding of the information. You are trying to understand why, despite knowing the risk that is inbuilt in the process, why still human beings engage into it. You are looking at it from a pure behavioral point of view. Why society at large admire things which has full of risk. You are trying to understand things from a pure sociological point of view. Why people use particular set of words to explain those experiences. You are trying to understand things from the linguistic point of view. So, there are a whole lot of things, and then finally you try to combine all of them to say that what are the guiding principles in life. Then you say you are looking at life, you are looking at humanity from a pure philosophical point of view. And this is what social sciences courses provide you. They provide the context to you in which you would be finally positioning the understanding of the knowledge in any given domain. It could be engineering, it could be sciences, it could be medical sciences, it could be social sciences stuff, it could be humanities stuff. So, contextualizing the knowledge is what humanities social science courses help you obtain.